Let's not forget that for years, all the Democrats did was attack President Trump's legitimacy because Russia, Russia, Russia. But with the Dems in charge, even suggesting there might be election fraud, it could mean jail time in Washington state. Yeah, radical far-left Governor Jay Inslee, he's supporting a bill that would charge candidates and elected officials who allege election fraud with a misdemeanor charge, a fine, or even jail time. Unbelievable. Joining us now to discuss is Newsmax contributor and former White House Deputy Press Secretary, Hogan Gidley, and the host of the Jason Rantz Show, Jason Rantz. Thank you both for joining us. Hogan, I gave you a little bit of a promotion there. We'll start with you. Inslee, he actually said that this bill was written to protect First Amendment rights. What do you say to this?
This is absolutely insane. First and foremost, the American people have been losing faith, trust, and confidence in our election for decades. In fact, it was the Democrats back in 2000 in the George W. Bush election in Florida that complained about the outcome. The Center for Election Integrity, of which I'm the director, just put out a video showing Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, all pointing to problems with elections. Even Jimmy Carter came out just a few days ago, a former president, and said Donald Trump did not win that election. It was, in fact, Russia that got him put there. He wasn't a legitimate president of the United States. The leftists have been complaining about this forever. So if we're going to start putting people in jail, you can start with the Democrats. But the fact that this governor is trying to silence folks, maybe that news about all those crack pipes going out from Joe Biden got to Jay Inslee first. It must have gone to the governors before anybody else. He must be smoking it because he clearly doesn't understand the First Amendment when he's trying to put people in jail for having questions, legitimate questions protected by the Constitution about our elections.
Thank you for saying that, Hogan. And let me direct this question at Jason, but following up on that, there is no question this Washington state bill is unconstitutional. It wouldn't survive 5 minutes inside a courtroom. I'd like to point out what former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall ruled in 1972. Here's what he said. But above all else, the First Amendment means the government has no power to restrict expression because of its message, ideas, subject matter, or content. That should put an end, am I correct, Jason? That should put an end to this Washington state bill.
It should, but of course it won't. And it likely would if it does end up passing. And it seems like it will end up getting to the Washington State Supreme Court, which unfortunately is filled with very far to the left justices. But I think you're right. The way to respond to speech that you disagree with is to provide more speech, to call it out, to give your perspective. There's no doubt there has been a lot of misinformation on this last election. There's also been very valid concerns about changes that were made under the guise of protection from COVID. If you're telling folks that they can no longer have these kinds of conversations and essentially threaten them, that you're going to prove to them, that to the people, to the courts, that they knowingly made a false statement, what you're effectively doing is making it so that there is no reasonable and legitimate safeguard to instances where there could be fraud. Is there a whole bunch of fraud that ends up changing elections? No, I don't believe that. Is there the potential for that? Of course, which is why we have a whole bunch of processes in place to mitigate any potential fraud. But one of the ways that you mitigate it is the ability to speak out when you think you see something that isn't quite kosher, that doesn't pass the smell test. And sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're right. But if you're not able to ask these questions under threat that you could go to jail because maybe someone will take it the wrong way and commit an act of violence, well, guess what? You're no longer able to question things that we should. And I think that that's an abuse.
Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, you know, Hogan, what we're seeing from this administration is really scary. We have that new DHS memo that essentially makes you a terrorist just for questioning the government. While, you know, even Texas Congressman Troy Nehls, he says that the Capitol Police is secretly investigating him, allegedly taking photos of constitutionally protected legislative documents in his office. I mean, what's happening here?
Look, I've said this for a long time. You led your show with it, and it's this. Democrats always accuse Republicans of things they themselves are guilty of actually doing. You hit on the Russia investigation, of course. You talk about how Democrats continually say that Republicans try and censor people. We try and shut down free speech when it's the Democrats who control all the levers of power and influence. It's the media, it's big tech, it's Hollywood, and it's colleges and universities. They run them all. They're the ones putting their finger on the scale, trying to tip it in their direction. They've done it for years. They've done it time and time again. The people now know it. They see it. And when you call parents terrorists for simply trying to find out what their children are learning in public schools they pay for with their tax dollars, you now see people getting furious around this country. They have every right to be, because so many things are happening that are destroying the fabric of this nation. It's time for the people to stand up. They are, and Democrats are terrified.
You know, I have to ask this question, Jason. It sounds facetious, but in view of all the times members of Congress have now called various viewpoints disinformation or misinformation and literally begged social media to silence those who are expressing these views. And now we see what Jay Inslee is doing in Washington state. Maybe it is that the people in high positions, such as members of Congress or governors, should have to take a test to see that they actually understand the principles of the Constitution, just like you have to take a driver's test. It's amazing how profoundly ignorant these people are.
I don't know if they're ignorant. I think this is willful. That's the difference. When you're in positions of power, for example, in Washington state, where you have so much control, they have total control in Olympia, our state capital. When you've got that kind of power, we know that it corrupts. This is not a new saying. And so when you are faced with the fact that maybe you could lose power coming up in these midterm elections, where it seems even in Washington state, we might not see a red wave, but we're going to hopefully see some ups, you might be more willing to say, enough. I know that this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to get away with it, because they justify it by saying I'm keeping out this evil, fascistic side of the Republican Party from office that would destroy this state and ultimately destroy this country. They've convinced themselves that they are right. And so they are willing to go way too far in order to keep the power that they've so far amassed. I agree. Obviously, we hope that the courts would get involved, again, if this were to pass. But I do think that that's where it is. I think they know exactly what it is they're doing. There's certainly some Democrats who are very clearly stupid and incompetent. I don't think that in this case, that's what we're talking about here. I think this is willful. They have to know.
Well, either way, it's
no
very
question.
dangerous. Don't you agree, Jen?
I sure do. And I think it's so easy, though, to see right through what the Democrats are doing right now. They seem so desperate. It's really kind of sad to watch, but amusing at the same time. Hogan Gidley, Jason Rantz, thank you both for your time tonight. Great to see you.